Welcome, everyone, to the third episode of the Cycling Magazine podcast. Dan, how's it going?
Oh, it's good. Did you get any riding in this weekend?
I watched some good riding this weekend.
It was the Burn Cross World Cup.
Yeah, it was pretty good. The women's race, I would say, was more exciting than the men's, but
Mags up to fourth at one point.
That's right.
Huge result, finishing in sixth.
And we will hear from Magali Rochette a little later on in the episode as we discuss the Silver Goose / Pan Am Championships.
Yeah, you spoke with Dr. Rachel McKinnon, the world's first transgender woman to win a world championship. That's been a huge story in the cycling community this last few weeks. So great that we got to talk to her. She's also a Canadian, so there's
right,
a bit of a homegrown touch to this.
Let's get into it. On October 14th, Rachel McKinnon tweeted, "First transgender woman world champion ever." This tweet followed her win on the track in Los Angeles. It was in the sprint competition that she took the win. It was in the Masters age category, 35 to 44. McKinnon is from Victoria. She did her PhD in Kitchener, Ontario, and her postdoc in Calgary. She's raced on the road, and recently she's been focusing mostly on the track. She did Canadian Nationals in September, where she competed in the Keirin, and the 500-meter time trial. Her day job is assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy at the College of Charleston in South Carolina. Following her win, her victory, and her tweet came a flurry of commentary online, some of it good, some of it very troll-like. I spoke to McKinnon about a week after her victory. Here's our conversation. It's been a little more than a week since you won the Masters Track World title in the sprint for the 35 to 44 age category. How's that week been for you?
In a word, overwhelming. I'm certainly not the first trans person to compete at this level, but I've spoken to some people and we suspect that I'm the first out trans woman to have this level of achievement in the age of social media. So it's probably true that the response to my win is the biggest ever, both positive and negative. So it's been nonstop interviews. In fact, I didn't get to stop and celebrate until this past Saturday night, so an entire week after I won.
And was the win a surprise to you?
Yes and no. I was a road cyclist for 3 full seasons, and I made it to the domestic elite level as a Category 1 in the US. I realized that I was getting as far as I ever could in road cycling, so track had always been alluring for me. As a road sprinter in something like a 60-minute criterium, I was always pretty bored for 58 minutes and only had fun in the final 2, but track sprinting is just those final 2 minutes. And we decided to make that change 15 months ago after a pretty rough summer of road racing. And so we've spent 15 months straight of 15 to 20 hours a week. I have 2 full-time coaches. We've consulted with other elite coaches. So we've dedicated all this time for this event. So it's not entirely surprising that that work paid off. But there was some surprise because it took everything going right for me to win. I didn't have any nerves like I normally do. My tactics were pretty much perfect, especially the final ride where she attacked from almost 450 meters out. As a track sprinter, you have to wait to pass until turn 3 or 4. And it's really hard to wait, but not get too far behind. And I didn't pass her until coming out of the final turn. So the margin between winning and losing is so small, especially against someone so talented and skilled as Caroline, that it was absolutely a bit of a shock to finally cross the line ahead of her.
And after your win, I think it was possibly the Friday after, the bronze medal finisher in that race, Jennifer Wagner, Asali came out on Twitter with a comment, "It's definitely not fair." How do things stand between you and Wagner Asali right now?
I don't know if we ever spoke beforehand. We certainly haven't spoken since. When she made that comment, she also made it in response to Katie Hopkins, who people can go look up if they like to. She doesn't have the best track record of being a good person. So I thought it was interesting that that was the person that Jennifer responded to. But I looked at my past race records with Jennifer, so people can go look at the website Road Results and check for themselves. Prior to the sprint tournament, I could find that we had raced 12 times together, and she had beaten me in 10 of those previous 12 races. So I'm not entirely sure why she thinks me winning this event, which is the third of 13 that I've beaten her, suddenly makes it unfair.
Did you have any sense of Wagner Asali's feelings when you shared the podium with her or were standing on the podium with her?
It's hard to say. She was a little distant while we were waiting for the podium and then on the podium, but I don't always attribute that to any sort of animosity between other people and me. People are sometimes socially awkward. I don't know. Certainly it didn't feel warm. Caroline van Herikhuizen had come up to me earlier that day, said hi. I asked her to be my team sprint partner next year at the Masters Worlds in England, to which she said yes. But we had a conversation where she was quite upfront how much she supports what I'm doing, how she's sorry for the sorts of misunderstandings that there are that I have to face. So immediately after my final with Caroline, we hugged off the bike. We also hugged right after the podium, but Jennifer wasn't particularly warm, but I didn't really chalk that up to anything at the time.
Also, later last week, following your win, the UCI sent out a statement, and they referenced the track event in which you took the world title. And then they also mentioned the International Olympic Committee was soon to announce guidelines covering, and this is their phrasing, participation of men, women, transgender athletes. Do you have any sense of what this is or what's in the works here?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that statement of theirs is one of the most bizarre statements I've ever seen.
How so?
So not only, they used transgender as a noun, so they said transgenders, which is incorrect. Then they used men, women to describe trans women, which is not only just linguistically incorrect, but is harmful in perpetuating the stereotype that trans women are really men who become women. That's just not always true, that people transition after puberty. But also this idea that trans women are just men in dresses is really harmful. So I thought the language that the UCI used was deeply inappropriate. But they name me and my victory, but then they make mention that they've received lots of complaints, but then they make no statement on whether they support me or not. So I thought it was strange that they name me and my achievement and then make no comment on the harassment and complaints I've received, including death threats. But then they make this very vague statement about the IOC. So here's my educated guess on that. The IAAF, which is the Athletics Federation, so track and field, they recently tried to institute a new policy based on bad science. I know the study that they're using, where they want to change the upper endogenous testosterone limit from 10 nanomoles per liter to 5 nanomoles per liter, but only for some select events. That is now being suspended because it's being challenged by Caster Semenya, the South African sprinter, in the Court of Arbitration for Sport. My guess is that the IOC might be thinking about lowering the testosterone limit for trans women, but I also suspect that they will lose that court case.
And why would they lose that court case?
So the study that they're basing this on is Berman and Garnier from 2017. And in that study, they found they tested over 2,000 athletes from the 2011 and 2013 IAAF World Track and Field Championships. And they found absolutely no relationship in men between endogenous testosterone and performance. We know that there's a relationship between doping testosterone, taking more than your body produces, and performance. And we know that if you reduce someone's natural testosterone, then there will be a reduction in performance. But if you are a person who has naturally high endogenous testosterone, there is absolutely no connection between that and you being better or faster than someone who has naturally low testosterone. A disproportionate number of elite men track and field athletes are below the average range for females, and yet they compete with men successfully. The problem is that this study was misleadingly written, that they found for women a sporadic and unpredictable relationship between testosterone and performance. So for some events, like the 400 meters, the 400 meter hurdles, the 800 meters, and the mile, they found some advantage for having high testosterone. But for other power events like javelin or even the 100 meters or 200 meter sprinting events, that there was a disadvantage for having high testosterone. So some people have called for that paper to be retracted because it's so poorly written and they didn't release the data for us to check for ourselves. But what I suspect is that the data is random. So the relationship between women and their performance in testosterone is actually random. But if you just select the highest positive outcomes and say those sports need to change the policy, that is terrible science and terrible policy. So I teach a class on this, and the activity I had them do Thursday is everyone in class had to flip a coin 10 times. And the average person is going to get 5 tails, 5 heads. But some people are going to get 1 or 2. Some people are going to get 7, 8, or 9. So that's a random distribution around the average of 5. What the IOC might be doing, and this is what the IAAF tried to do, is say that, well, if you flipped 8 or more tails, then you are out of sport as a female, which seems a little silly.
How does Canada compare to these rules, and how does Canada implement these rules for trans athletes?
Canada's rules are in flux, and what happened was a few years ago, Kristen Worley, who is a trans woman athlete, took Cycling Canada and the UCI to the Ontario Human Rights Commission. So she filed a human rights complaint against the current UCI and Cycling Canada rules on trans athlete participation. And the case was settled in mediation, where what we understand is that Cycling Canada would work to update its policies to be more progressive than the current UCI policies. I'm not sure exactly where that stands now. I think that Cycling Canada has been dragging its heels a little bit. Certainly, Cycling Canada, as far as I know, has made no statement about my winning the world championship as a trans woman. So I'm not entirely sure where current Canadian official policies stand.
But you're still competing in Canada. You're at Track Nationals just this year?
Yes, I was at Nationals about a month ago.
So there's a USA Today article that came out in January, and it's been discussed or cited over this past week. And this article frames two sides to the story of trans athletes, and it frames it as two different versions of fairness. The article says one of your fellow riders, Jillian Bearden, is trying to balance what, let's say, human rights versus, say, physiological fairness for cisgender women. And then it frames your argument as a human rights argument. And physiological fairness, let's say, doesn't seem to be a priority. Is that a fair characterization of two different positions, or does that accurately portray your positions?
I don't think it's a fair representation. Unfortunately, that USA Today article was quite biased in how they wrote it. Also, I don't think it's useful to pit trans athletes against other trans athletes, so I don't participate in that narrative. The USA Today article did that without my knowledge or consent. So it's not the case that my view on this, and I am a professor, an internationally recognized expert on athlete rights, who researches both the legal, ethical, and scientific evidence on this matter. It's not the case that I only present the human rights argument about trans athlete participation. The scientific evidence is relevant, but one thing that's important is that in the Olympic Charter of the IOC, they have 7 fundamental principles of Olympism. The 4th begins with a complete sentence that says, participation in sport is a human right. They mean competitive sport. So when we're talking about when it's okay to override someone's human right, the scientific evidence has to be overwhelming and uncontroversial. My work on this topic, I fly around the world giving presentations on this. I'm publishing papers on this at the moment. Is that the scientific evidence is not overwhelming. In fact, there is no scientific evidence that trans women enjoy a competitive advantage over cisgender women. And there's certainly no evidence that transgender women enjoy an unfair competitive advantage over cisgender women. So I bring the scientific evidence to support the human rights argument. So it's just not the case that I am only presenting the human rights argument and I'm disregarding the science. My work shows that the science also supports my view.
In athletic endeavors, sometimes it seems to be a genetic lottery that gives someone the advantage. I think you've referenced Michael Phelps, and just his physiology makes him a really good swimmer compared to others. Could it be time to look beyond gender for categories for competition? There's also sort of a precedent for this. We see masters categories based on age because there's the understanding that as age increases, athletic ability declines. So the goal there is to match like ability with like ability. And with paracycling, there's also different classifications to match ability with ability. Is there a way to do that with other endurance athletes?
I have a really long answer to this question. It's a good question. It's a completely reasonable question. But my first thing to say about this is my work, both as an academic and researcher and professor, but also as an athlete and an activist for transgender athlete rights, is that I am working currently within the modern framework of sport, and particularly IOC. Since cycling is an Olympics eligible sport, all cycling federations have to at least adhere to the IOC policies. So organizations can be more permissive than the IOC and the UCI, but they cannot be less permissive. So the recent 2015 interim decision by the Court of Arbitration for Sport for Dutee Chand, who is an Indian intersex sprinter, very clearly lays out an important framework for how we think about sport currently in the IOC and Olympic eligible sports. They say that we currently separate sport into 2 sex genders, male and female, and that these categories are meant to cover every single athlete. Also, if you are legally recognized as male, you must compete in the male category. If you are legally recognized as female, you must compete in the female category. So I am legally recognized as female as a trans woman. All my identification says female, my birth certificate says female, my passport, all these things. I must compete in the female category by the rules of sport as we have them now. So you might say, well, either we should have a third category for trans athletes, or why do we even categorize by gender at all? My response to that is, but that's not what I'm doing. My work is on, given how we currently structure sport, should trans women be allowed to compete with women? And I think the answer to that is a very clear yes. And sometimes it's a little unfair to try to change the topic and say, well, let's talk about why we even have gendered sport in the first place. Because I'm saying, well, given that we do, what should we say about trans people? We can have that discussion later. It's a different discussion, though. And it is changing the topic. But let's change the topic. You want to change the topic? Let's change the topic. What should we say about how we categorize sport now? Well, you're right that there are certainly options. The worst option would to create a trans woman only category. Some people say a trans only category, but I don't think that there's even considering that trans men exist. So people are saying, okay, a trans woman only category. Well, the problem there is we are legally recognized as women, but what you're saying is that we're not real women, that we can identify however we want to. We can have the government legally recognize us as women, but we will not do so for the purposes of sport. You can have your own other category. But that creates a separate but equal situation that is inherently unjust. People are treating trans women as other, which is unfair. So I don't think we should be talking about a trans-only category as another way to categorize sport. But what you're asking is, well, could we just categorize sport by ability and have people of equal ability compete against each other? So that can work at everything but the elite level. But there's also this problem of how do we determine categories? So in cycling, a lot of people care about FTP or functional threshold power. So are we going to categorize road cycling by FTP? Will we do it by watts per kilo? So at my peak as a domestic elite road racer, my FTP was 270 at 175 pounds. Well, 270 sounds like a lot in the women's field unless we're going uphill, and then it's watts per kilo. So which number matters? On flat stages, I was competitive as a sprinter. I have won a professional road race before at the Tour of Southern Highlands, but it was a downhill finish where being heavy is an advantage. The very next stage was a hilly mountain road stage. I was out the back within a quarter mile of the first climb. In fact, it was about 200 meters into the first climb, which started 5 minutes into the race, and I was out the back. So how are we going to group people? Is it just by raw wattage? Is it by watts per kilo? Because our cycling abilities also depend on the course that we're racing. There's a reason why Mark Cavendish can win a world championship if it's flat enough, but if it's a hilly one, he's not even going to go. So even drawing up the categories by something like power isn't clear. But what happens, how narrowly do we reduce the categories? Is it by 10 watts, 20 watts? Think how hard it is to find enough cyclists at a regional race as it is, and now you're going to chop that up by 50-watt bands, for example. You're going to have a lot of races with 1, 2, 3, 4 people, and that's not very good. So I think the finer you want to level that playing field by equal ability, the smaller the races get. Also, at the very top of the sport, you want to see what the very best do, and you want to see people with different types of abilities use different tactics. So you see in Tour de France stages, someone might attack really late out in a mountain stage or a hilly stage, and they can win if no one chases them, but if someone has better tactics, then the person who's weaker can still win. So I think trying to chop up sport into finer and finer categories is not going to be better for sport.
What's the most significant thing that your win this past week has shown you?
I think two things. One is personal, that I personally can overcome the level of stress and harassment that I face from just showing up. I have PTSD and an anxiety disorder from the harassment I've faced in cycling. People have tried to get me banned. People have lied about me in racing to have me relegated. That was one reason to switch to track cycling, where the officials can always see you. And on Saturday of the semifinal and final, I had to avoid social media because a lot of hate messages were coming my way for breaking the world record in the 200-meter qualifying, even though it was broken 10 minutes later by a cisgender athlete. So it taught me that I do have the resources to manage the spotlight and to still succeed. So I learned a lot about myself that day. The other thing is that I get a lot of strength from being a beacon for other people and inclusive sport. I agree with the IOC that sport is a human right and everyone has a right to compete in competitive sport. And I want to make sport more welcoming for everybody, no matter who you are, what you look like, how you identify. And I think that this win has brought that into the public's eye in a way that it hasn't been for a long time or maybe ever.
Rachel McKinnon, thank you for your time. This is a very important story that I imagine is going to continue to develop, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again in the future.
Well, thanks. If I can leave with a parting message to people who are coming to this topic for the first time, let me just remind you that you are talking about real people with feelings, so please be kind.
Thank you very much. Canadian Rachel McKinnon is the women's world champion in the Masters 35 to 44 category for the track sprint competition. Philippe Tremblay, web editor at Canadian Cycling Magazine. How you doing?
Good. And you, Matthew?
Excellent. You spoke to 3 athletes about the Silver Goose. Tell us a bit about the Goose.
The Goose is the Pan American Championships in 2018. It's the first time they're going to be held in Canada. It's taking place up north of Toronto at Midland. It's a beautiful venue that hosted a UCI race last year. And the athletes who I spoke to are pretty excited about it.
That's right. So one of them is last year's winner from the Silver Goose. So she knows the course well. That's Ruby West. And she seems to be going pretty good right now with just recently at Sherbrooke, the cross races there, which are C2 races. She did back-to-back wins on that weekend.
Yeah, she was coming back from a concussion, which she sustained in training, which was a pretty big hurdle to overcome early in her season. She wasn't at either of the North American World Cups, but she came back in a big way.
Mm-hmm. Who else did you talk to?
Michael Vandenham, the Canadian cyclocross champion. He was third at Pan Am's last year. He's having an excellent season already. He's, he's going to be going for that podium again, and he has a pretty good shot at it on home soil. And the other one is Magali Rochette, who was just 6th at the World Cup in Bern, Switzerland. A huge result for her. And when she shows up, she comes in as a favorite. There's no doubt about that. For sure.
She won as a U23 rider. She won the Pan Am Championship in 2014. So, yeah, cyclocross fever all around. So let's hear from the athletes.
Hi, I'm Ruby West. I spent a lot of the summer preparing for the cyclocross season, and with my new team, I was really excited to kind of get out there and show what I got and prove to myself that I had prepared well for the season. So I was feeling really good going into those races, and literally the day I was supposed to fly out, I had that crash. So I think at first I didn't really process it all. I think the pain kind of overtook more. But I think as it set in over the weeks that followed and as the races were going on and I was sitting at home having to hear about them, that was really disappointing for me because those were some big goals for me this season. But it's been, I guess, mentally pretty challenging, kind of trying to stay motivated and optimistic that I'll be back out there. And now that I'm feeling a lot better, I'm just excited for the rest of the season and kind of have just had to modify some goals and remember that it's a long season and kind of just, shift the way I was thinking about it, I guess.
The significance of this is an opportunity for any rider who lives in, who lives in the Americas, basically North America, South America, to win a jersey. It if you haven't seen it, it's somewhat similar to the rainbow jersey in appearance, I guess, white jersey with some stripes on front. And that signifies the Pan American champion, which is a pretty big deal. It's the only chance as Canadians, or if there's Mexican or Argentinian racers, it's our chance to go out and win a jersey against a lot of our American contemporaries that you get to wear for the rest of the season. So of course that's, and anytime there's a jersey at stake, that's a pretty big deal. Now, with it coming to Canada, I think that raises the stakes even a little bit more because, everyone wants to win a big jersey like this in front of their home crowd. That just makes the race so much more exciting and so much more important.
This is Magali Rochette. I think every time it's a championship, everyone kind of has the same goal, and that goal, I think, is to win a championship. For me, anyway, that's what it is. And honestly, I think that is probably the goal every time I line up for a race. Everyone wants to win. So I'll do my best for that. But honestly, if I have a clean race and I do everything I can, the best I can't be disappointed if someone is just stronger than me that day.
I knew last year coming in to the Silver Goose that was kind of a local race, and I really enjoyed that course and racing on it. So when I heard that was going to be the course for Pan Ams this year, it made me really excited that I'd already seen it and gotten a chance to race on it. I think that was one of my favorite races I did last year. The course was so cool. The organization was amazing. It just felt like a really professionally run event, and it was so close to home that it was a really unique feel. I'm not sure if it gives me an edge, but I think I'll definitely be comfortable going back to the course and the venue. And it just makes me really excited that I kind of have a bit of an idea of what that place is like. I'm sure they'll make tons of changes to the course, but it's just cool to kind of have a sense of at least a mental picture of where I'll be racing.
I've been, since the second it was announced this is in Canada, I've been dreaming, thinking about winning, of course. That's a pretty lofty goal. There are a lot of really great racers out there, and for a win to happen, it takes everything going right on the day. But my expectations are that I show up to the start line with all the pieces in place to contend for the victory. Past that point, I have no idea what's going to happen. It's cyclocross. There's a million different things, but I want to be in the position to be able to contend for that victory. Of course, I'm very proud to be Canadian, and I really feel like the cyclocross communities, I started racing in Alberta. I've since moved to BC. They've really done a lot to support me and to help me. And anywhere I go, especially wearing the maple leaf, I want to feel like I'm representing the cyclocross communities and Canada. I want to represent us, and I want to do really well for all these different people that have helped me get to where I am now. So for sure, it carries some significance, but I think it carries that significance for me anyways, no matter where I'm racing, whether that's in Belgium or whether that's in Texas or whether that's in Midland, Ontario.
In my mind, I try to never count anyone out because on race day, and especially at a championship race, everyone brings their A game. So you can never count someone to be out. But definitely if we look at what's been happening this season so far, for sure, Katie Keogh is going to be really strong. As you said, she just won a World Cup, and she's always is really strong. Katie Compton, of course, is going to be tough to beat. So far, since the championships is alive, she's won it every time, so she is unbeaten right now. So she will be a tough one to beat. Ellen Noble, as we've mentioned, I think it's going to be a great race. A lot of people will fight for that top step on the podium, and it will be exciting to watch, I think. As much as I enjoyed having a team for the past several years, it's very cool to have the flexibility of changing your schedule when you need to, or when you feel like you have to. For example, early on at the first World Cup, I was sick and I wasn't able to complete the race in Waterloo. And that being said, I wasn't supposed to go to the World Cup in Switzerland when I initially made my calendar. But since I missed that World Cup, now I decided to go. And that's one of the things that I'm able to do with that new program, which is great. The other things that I really enjoy is having direct contact with the sponsors and being able to do some really fun projects with them. So as you mentioned, 10 Speed Hero has been coming out. Every races that they're coming out to, they're giving out one kit to a kid that is there racing. So that's one fun thing. But we're also working on a lot of projects with them, with 10 Speed Hero that you should see coming out in the social media pretty soon. So having all of these things going on is very, very stimulating, and personally makes me very excited. So I think it's kind of one more motivating factor to that even like translates into training and the racing. It's just really, really fun and super exciting.
Pan Ams and Nationals were two huge goals of mine going into the season. And I'm grateful that the crash hasn't changed that. I think it's kind of made them even more important because I didn't get those early World Cups. So I'll really be focused on them. It's also nice because they're so close together. So the peak for training and fitness can kind of hopefully coincide well with those two so close. But definitely that's a huge goal for me. And hopefully, having Pan Ams before Nationals means that I get to race in the national champ jersey. So I think that'll give me a lot of motivation for Nationals. And yeah, I just want to be able to wear that all season again. And it's just such a big honor to have the maple leaf on your back. So that's definitely a huge goal for me. It's a different race when you're racing for third or fourth or fifth, or just a top 10 or a top 20 in the World Cups or whatever your goal is, versus when you're racing to win. And I think that making that leap for me was a big confidence thing. I think my fitness was where it needed to be, but the real thing was the confidence at being at the front of those races. And that takes a lot when you're used to racing girls and looking up to them for so long and racing them week in and out. And then all of a sudden you're ahead of them, or you're battling to get to a corner first with them. So it's kind of intimidating at first, but I think that confidence was something that I developed throughout the season. And I think that ultimately, I think that really helped me last year, and I'm trying to carry that forward this year, but haven't had too many chances to implement it so far. But I know at Rochester, that was a big thing for me. I had a really good start at those races each day, and kind of being at the front is a little overwhelming sometimes. But I think that, having the confidence in yourself that you can be up there. Personally, that was a big thing for me. So yeah, I think that's kind of what I carried with me last season, and hopefully will continue to this year.
There's probably a list of 5 or 6 people who could conceivably win. And with Hyde and Powers being down and out a little bit right now, I think that actually makes the race more exciting because they're still absolutely contenders. And I would never count out either of those guys, but it means that there's another 3 or 4 people who also have a shot. So I think we're going into this with really no idea who's going to be there, and who's going to be contending for the victory. My goal isn't to be the best racer in Canada or anything like that. My goal is to be the best racer I possibly can be, and that means competing at a high level against my American counterparts and my European counterparts. So it's not as if I'm building up towards this single event and then the rest of the season's a write-off. I'm trying to build my season around being competitive for nationals, but also just race at a high, consistent level for the entire season so that I can continue to push myself. I want to be seen as one of the best racers in North America and the best racer that I can be, not just try to be the best racer in Canada, if that makes sense.
It's always a challenge to try to be consistent over the long season. And it's something that every year you kind of modify a few things here in training and a few things there, and you try to be as consistent as possible and try to do, like for me, it's trying to do as many races as possible, but still getting some chunks of time that I can actually train, because otherwise I feel like just racing, I kind of lose a little bit of my fitness. And in like towards the end of the season, you're kind of out of breath a little bit. You're kind of missing that little punch. So it's really trying to figure that out, and the travel plays a big part in that as well. So honestly, for me, having some races in Canada just makes it a little bit easier because I get to go to the biggest races, but they're not very far from home. And it also allows me to spend more time at home between and before these races, which is great. And also on top of that, it gives me the opportunity to interact with all the Canadians that do have the fever, and that's really special to me.
The Pan Am Cyclocross Championships, also known as the Silver Goose, will run November 3rd and 4th in Midland, Ontario. And that's the episode. It's put together by that guy over there, Dan Walker, also Philippe Tremblay, and me, Matthew Piero.
Now, if you want more Canadian Cycling Magazine content, follow us on Instagram at Canadian Cycling. Follow us on Twitter at Canadian Cycling as well. On Facebook, we're at Cycling Mag. If you want to download, it's on iTunes, it's on Stitcher, it's on Google Play Store, it's on Spotify and Intune. Remember to rate and review, but only if it's 5 stars and only if it's something nice. I saw you, the 3-star person. And if you have a question or comment, it's podcast@cyclingmagazine.ca.
Thank you, Dan. And in your excitement to tell everybody where to find the podcast, you forgot our producer, Adam Killick.
On the ones and twos, Adam Killick.
That's right. Thank you, Adam. Without his help, we would sound bad. And also, thank you to the Ontario Media Development Corporation for its support. See you next time.